Hi, everybody. This is Jenova Chen from Thatgamecompany. I'm the creative director behind Flow, Flower, Journey, and recently Sky Children of the Light. And my talk today is about From Journey to Sky, evoke positive social interactions through design. Um, as I talk about emotion, I often like to look at this chart when people map colors to different kind of human emotions, from very intense to very mild. And when we think about the vibrance of the colors, it's just like how we have a market where each of the color represents a different craving from a human need. In the entertainment medium, like film, different emotion have a different size of the market. They change based on the month of the year, and they have a different kind of demographic for uh, different genders and different age. When we use the same emotional chart to look at games, in the early days with arcade, and there's a lot of action games. And then as game become console, and many younger children have console at home, as they grow up, game also become more popular for the teenagers, and they have these adventure and thrillers and horrors, things that's very popular among younger audience. And even recently, we have comedy. But what I want to point out is that many of these popular game genre in the past 30 years are much simpler, more pure emotions of kind of non-color. But there are more nuanced emotional market, like comedy and drama, that is more about a mix of emotions to achieve something together. They are rather less explored. I just want to show a different map. This is a map about what men and women at different age appreciate. So on the left side, we have these are the film genres, but they are still talking about emotion, right? Horror film, action film, adventure film, and sci-fi film are very, very affiliated to what men like. So the closer a genre is towards a particular demographic on this chart, that the more they like them. On the right side is movie genre that's more popular among female audience. And you can see in the middle is these comedy is actually liked by both men and women, and particularly to a younger audience. And then drama is much more popular for the more mature audience, and documentary is certainly more popular for the older audience. What I want to point out is, if you look at these genres, even though it was defined by movie, many of the same genre can be found in novel, and in television. And if you look at these red areas, that's what I see as very, very saturated video game emotional market. Clearly, young men has lots of video game that they like emotionally. And there are certain level of game genre that is actually enjoyable for kind of 30 to 45-year-old women, particularly in the casual game category. But for the rest of the emotional chart, video game is still relatively new. Even with a comedy game, that recently happened with the Untitled Goose Game, that is very much a comedy game, right? And we have very few game that is not just funny because of the dialogue, but also because of the interactions. And because of this lack of emotional content, today we are still asking, are you a gamer or not? Instead of saying, hey, honey, what kind of mood are you in? Let's watch a film. Let's listen to music. We are still saying, are you a gamer or not? And my passion is to see one day that game will be treated as equal to poetry, to novel, to film, and to any other form of art. But we're not there yet, and that's why I feel like to create to push the boundary and to bring new emotions that appeal to a wider set of audience is a necessary step for video game as an industry, as a medium, to be accepted by everybody. So at That Game Company, we dedicated our effort to make games that evoke these kind of sorry, I mean like what we are focusing on is to create high quality game that could sustain through the test of time, but also connects the player worldwide to a positive emotional experience. And we are very interested in making a game to appeal to all ages. We've made our first 3 games on the PlayStation, Flow, Flower, and Journey. And particularly with Flower and Journey, we really wanted to try a new type of emotions, hoping to attract new type of audience. And we have seen some success in galleries and in museums. We noticed a lot of people who are not necessarily PlayStation gamers would want to interact with our type of game. And we noticed that many of them were never gamers. And so one of the big challenge for making new emotional content is to make the game accessible. This is a video of a kid with Down syndrome enjoying our game because it's quite simple to play. You just need to use the 6-axis controller to apply emotion, and then that's enough to direct you through the game. And his older brother was pretty excited because his younger brother can't really play a normal game that involving text and learning and readings. But making games simple and accessible to non-gamer has been something we have been pushing really hard on. When we are working on Journey, this is the first online game that we ever made. Again, our focus is not to make a traditional action and adventure game, but our focus is to see if we can create a strong dramatic feeling. Kind of, if we look at the emotional chart, it's like the art house drama game, and see if this emotional impact can really influence the player. And some of our players who played our game had almost a therapeutic effect because they were really, really touched by the game that allowed them to actually get more value out of entertainment. And throughout the years, when we work with PlayStation, we always was told we were always told by the players that how our game has been the first game that they ever played with their daughter, or this is the first game their wife watched and finished and was emotionally touched. And so what we thought was, if we want to make games that could be emotionally relevant to a bigger audience, particularly to those areas that I showed earlier was not there, we should take our game to a platform where most of those audience actually owns. And so starting from 2012, we decided to go from console to mobile and to make cross-platform. And that comes with Sky. So from Journey to Sky, it was really kind of our journey to try to make emotional game from a single player to a kind of online society where multiple people are playing together. And what drives us is still through the emotion. And for me, the thing that really stayed core to my creative career has been this kind of duality of loneliness and wanting to connect with others. For a very long time, I've been playing World of Warcraft, and at the time, I just came to America, and I was studying in a graduate school. Work is pretty busy, so my social life is almost minimal. At the time, I have the opportunity to get into play World of Warcraft. And I was thinking maybe I would be able to find a real friend or a girlfriend in a virtual world. And so I've been focusing on seeing if I can build a relationship with somebody. But the problem with World of Warcraft is it's a dungeon looting game. It's all about raiding and looting. Uh, a lot of time when I wanted to have a social connection with someone, they would just say, "Hey, it's time to fight the boss. Right? You got to go over there, stand over here." Um, and when the boss battle is over, I finally felt like there's time to talk. People just busy looting, and then afterwards, everybody just disappeared. So for a very long time, I felt quite lonely as an immigrant in a country where it's most of the time I'm just alone and have to work multiple jobs and pay for loans. And I was thinking about why isn't there an online game where it's focusing on making me not lonely. It's focusing on creating a moment where I and another person can feel that at least at this very moment, at this very location, we share something and we feel something in common. Um, and I was pretty distraught by some of the online experience where I, will be judged because I don't speak good English on the voice chat, or they notice that whatever my grammar was a problem, right? Or if they know that I am a man, or I'm a student, or if they know I'm Asian, there's all kinds of prejudgment that I really don't see as necessary if we're playing in a virtual world. And so at the time I started to have this idea, can we create a game where your age and your gender and your race and your economic class is not being judged? Reality is already so tough. Like, we're playing a game. Can we treat each other equally? And as I start to make this concept art about my dream MMO game where people can actually focus on being connected and not being alone, I noticed that just having someone that I want to follow or I'm interested in connecting with doesn't necessarily solve the loneliness problem. Yeah, it's like even if you have a crush on somebody, you still feel alone because there's no reciprocation. To feel not alone, you actually have to feel that there are other people who actually emotionally need you. And then you won't feel alone. So in this drawing, I discovered that just through visual that I realized it's not only that you need to hold hand of someone, but you also need to hold hand to protect someone else. And so when I was working on Journey, it's a one-on-one multiplayer game. It's at any time you can only see one player that is playing online. One big problem with creating online games and creating new emotion is there's not much reference you can get, because most of the games, as I mentioned, was designed for a younger male audience. And those games tend to create emotion that really fulfill what young men like, which is freedom and empowerment, because that's what they're lacking the most in that particular age and this particular social background. And so when the game is focusing on making you feel powerful, when you are put into an online social situation, the first reaction is who's going to beat who is better, right? And even if we put players in a survival situation, we often see like after the player kills all the zombies, they start to kind of prank at each other, like kill someone right before they arrive to the next destination because they have a powerful weapon in the hand. What I learned is that to make people want to socialize, to create emotion that people can connect with each other, we have to revert the power dynamics. In most of the games, the player are the superhero, the space marine. They are here to change the world. I mean, to annihilate the enemies. Um, but if we change the dynamic, where players are small, and the environment and the enemies are overwhelming, then they actually more likely wanted to team up and to collaborate. Uh, a lot of the game had very strong goal-driven kind of feedback loop, right? It's all about looting and getting the next big stuff. When the game's core loop is about looting, just like I've talked about in the situation of World of Warcraft, the existence of another player might just be a mean to help you to finish the raid. But for a social emotion to happen, the game shouldn't be purely focusing on the raid and the rewards, and it should be more about each individual. Um, in a social game, I wanted to see someone and have a emotional exchange. I care about how are you doing, right? But most of the video game focus on the action, so they don't even get a chance to even socialize. Uh, that that opportunity is already removed. Um, and so some people will say, well, maybe you can put a social situation in an action game. The problem with action game is the players are already so overwhelmed with sensory. They don't have the attention to, they don't have the bandwidth to pay attention to each other. We kind of have to remove all the noise and remove those powerful tools and weapons in their hand. And then they start to like, oh, okay, there's a bunch of players in this game. But having too many players is also kind of creating the same noise problem. It's like, you cannot focus on an individual. So what we were doing experiment, we noticed that if we actually put the player in an environment where they feel there is a sense of unknown, there's a sense of danger, and there isn't many people, then people become the focus. And only when we condition the player in that emotional state where they are in some kind of vulnerability, that when they run into another player, the emotional response is no longer, hey, how am I going to shoot at this person in his head? But instead, it's about, oh my God, there's another person. I got to go check him out and say hi or at least greet. And so that's kind of like the foundation we learned, just to simply emotionally making people connect. Is to creating this vulnerability in a sense of all. It's kind of a emotional state that you feel you're small and you feel like you're not quite familiar with, and you don't have answers of the environment. But once you create this emotion, we also notice that many traditional game design would actually break these kind of immersion. So, for example, this is the interface in Journey where we don't have any text to even say your name, because we noticed in a lot of online games, people like to make pranks about their names. They like to reference celebrities and be insulting sometimes. And as soon as you see them in the game, those names actually took you out of that immersion, where you treat the other person as an equal human being. Immediately, if that person's name is, Donald Trump, you would have a lot of judgment, and that's the exact thing I wanted to avoid. And because of that, with text chat and voice chat, it will immediately make other players start to judge you. Well, all we really want is people to look at each other with no judgment, and at the very beginning to see each other as a human being. And in order to protect that pure connection, we actually have to delay to reveal our player's name tag all the way until the end credits. Otherwise, if people see this person's name is Funky Bottoms, they probably wouldn't have a wonderful experience. And another thing we noticed is typically when we want to make a game that is more fun, sometimes it makes it less social. It makes it almost negative. So what happened is Many of the online games don't have collision because latency problem, right? But we were working on one-on-one player game, and we could afford low latency, and we could actually make the player to have real collisions. And so on paper, we think, oh, if the player can be more physical with each other, and they could push each other and pull, and they can do much more collaboration. We have very good wishful thinking here, and we even have artists to make concept art to create these situations where it's pretty cool if you can pull these things off with another person. But what happened is human psychology is very very counterintuitive. When we created collision where they can push each other around, instead of helping them to push them up to climb a wall or an obstacle, they like to push each other into dangerous situations. And people love to kill each other when they can, push them and have a maximum feedback. For quite a long time, I was quite disappointed about mankind and the human nature. I think humans are born evil and born a troll. But one day I talked to a child psychologist, and she told me, oh, those jerk behavior you described sounded like babies. And when you transform an adult from reality into a virtual game where everything is reset, everything is new, we are no different from a baby. And when we come to this kind of world, just like baby, in order to learn, we like to push the boundaries. We want to see what is the maximum feedback. If you push a person to climb an obstacle versus push a person to kill them, you see the blood, you see the scream, and you have the social, kind of suddenly the power to be able to revive someone. It's way more fun. So when we were learning from these mistakes, we realized that the only way to teach baby to not to do mean things, to not behave like a jerk, is to give baby zero feedback on jerky behaviors. So we actually removed the collision again, where a player can no longer push each other. Instead, we added one more thing, is when two players touch each other, they would both gain resources, and that allows them to fly high. And this actually makes the player really love to be next to each other. So we managed to change a game from, during the playtest, people were saying, I don't like to play this game with other people. They're just stealing my stuff, right? To, oh, I would love to stay with this person all the way through the journey because, I actually have a good time and good connection, and also I get to fly all the time. So that's kind of like a lesson we learned from Journey. But I think the biggest inspiration I got was that there is no jerks, good person or bad person in a virtual space when everything's, there is no moral value established. It's up to the designers to use the feedback to establish what is the moral value of the world. And so after we made Journey, many of the people told us wonderful stories of how they connected with a stranger online, and they formed a beautiful relationship across the ocean. And many of the players who we talked to asked us if we can kind of expand that social experience between two complete strangers into friends and family. And so that is something that we kind of feel that is our players asking us to do. And so we're looking into that. This is the same chart I showed earlier. To create a game that a whole family can play is actually not easy. Because if you think about the movies that men like and the movies that women like, they're very different. And to stay somewhere in the center where a gamer and his wife can play together, or a gaming parents and their children can play together, we have to kind of find the middle ground, right? We need to find emotion that is both interesting to men and to women, both sophisticated enough for adult and still entertaining for the kid. If you can think of any Disney or Pixar movies, and those movies that manage to capture a whole family, they always have, most of them are animated, certainly very appealing to children. They happen to happen in fantasy world setting, not sci-fi. Usually the sci-fi is very bleak, very depressing, and that's less attractive to the female audience, while fantasy tend to attract both. There's always some kind of funny sidekicks, because comedy is there to keep everybody engaged, regardless of your age, young or old, right? But then there's also these artistic moment, the art house moment, where even the parents can have a single tear in their eyes when they leave the theater. So they felt like they were spoken to. It's not a Saturday morning cartoon only for kids to watch. It's something that speaks humanity to even the parents. So art house and drama, they're all involved. Sometimes involving suspense, but never horror for family-friendly content. And so that is a very interesting market that emotionally I felt video game is still quite lack of. It's essentially like the equivalent of a Pixar for interactive media. You might say, well, that's not true. There's many family-friendly games. We've seen parents playing with children, and there are online games that is designed for, multiple adults to play together and to keep them connected. And there are online games for children to play together to keep them connected. But I haven't seen a game that managed to connect multiple generations together, men and women together in an emotional level. So this has been quite an inspiring thing, because I was looking into Disney, and Disney later in his year stopped making these movies. He started to make Disneyland. And the story of Disneyland is very similar to the video game industry. So when Disney was taking his daughter to local theme parks, before Disneyland was there, or Universal Studios, the theme park was mostly to appeal to younger audience, because that tend to make the quicker money. And what happened is, in those parks, the roller coaster ride seat is designed to be very small so they can fit in more kids. But Disney is pretty tall; he can't even sit on the train. And the food is all designed to attract children, so there's candy bars and junk food. But Disney himself is quite hungry. There's no food to buy, and people only cared about the kids who's on the roller coaster ride, but they didn't care about the parents who are waiting downstairs, in the sun. So they are sweating, they are hungry, they cannot leave the park because they don't feel it's safe. And so that gives Disney the inspiration. Why don't we make a park that both the adults and children can have a good time? And that's kind of like the story. And that kind of gives me the inspiration where, why don't we have a game that we can, instead of having the mobile devices to kind of separate family from each other, creating these invisible walls, we actually connect the family in this magical virtual world where they can interact with their family member, and they would also see other families from other part of the world to also be playing together. And so that becomes our inspiration behind the project of Sky, to connect players across gender and generation. And I will skip these slides. This is a painting by Andrew N.C. Wires. He's Andrew Wires' dad. He's known for being the painter, illustrator of the Treasure Island. He made this painting that was kind of in memory of his pupil, who is a very young and upcoming painter, but died at the early 20s. So he made this painting, and he, in his imagination, that all his children, even though many of them are over 30 and 40s when he painted this painting, are staying as children, and his favorite student become the child with the white hat, and he dreamed of that's where everybody has gone, you know, after they die. And I just thought that was such a compelling world, and I wish I could be there. And so we started to, you know, based on that inspiration, to dream up the sky. And as a cross-generation game designed for family, we want to combine, you know, mysterious a mystery gameplay with family-friendly friendly content, but we want to deeply connect the players, connect the family within the family, but also connect between the families. And also because it's a mobile game, this is the first time we have to create a monetization in a free-to-start kind of business model. A lot of the games have very aggressive monetization model. And I was simply looking at the feeling the game is evoking, and I noticed many of them actually give me a very kind of self-defeating emotions. Like I felt like I paid for something because I'm greedy. You know, it's such a great deal, I would just buy it. Or sometimes I paid for something that because I'm angry, someone stole my resources, I wanted to revenge. And I just don't think these emotions belong to the social community of Sky. And so for a very long time, you know, Sky was a long development process. We spent almost 2 years in the middle of the production to focus on what kind of monetization model can make the player feel positive and to feel good about the interactions that they just committed in the game. And what we found is when people are paying for others for altruistic reasons, for compassion, for appreciation, that is actually something that I can see that will fit in a virtual Disneyland and for a whole family to entertain. So Sky at its core is a game about humanity, community, and wonder. It's a game where regardless of your age and gender, you are all a child with no specific race or gender signs. And you're a child of light, and your goal is to come into this world and save this and find the fallen stars and bring them back to the sky. Like Journey and Flower, we like to tell our story without words. We want to use the environment to let the player to discover what has happened in the past. And in this game, you will run into many characters. We want to use them as a metaphor of the different aspects of humanity. And there are 7 of them. And this is a multiplayer game at its core. Sky is not an action game. And in order to explore and to overcome the challenges, you have to collaborate with fellow players. Some of the land could be very difficult and scary, but this is the moment where you can count on your friend and your family to help you out. At maximum, because it's on the phone, we designed the game to allow up to 8 players to play. And because this is an online game, we have been constantly updating the game and adding new content and fixing problems. So we just passed our 5th season. So each season we have a completely new content, but many, many updates to the game. And through making Sky, there's many, many things I want to talk about. But today I just kind of want to focus on, you know, how we use our design to foster a positive community. And many of the players have been telling us that by playing Sky, they have made friends who they have never spoken to. They made a friend that is across the continent, across the ocean. And this particular player wrote us a letter. She is from Hawaii, and she told us that how she's not typically what we would consider as a gamer, but through playing Sky, she made real meaningful friends that made her have to experience the sense of love. And this is something that she was never expecting at this older age, that she never thought that could be possible. And she wants to thank us for what this game have contributed to her. And we have, in order to connect with our player, we also wanted to not just let the player connect with each other, we wanted to be vulnerable to our player too. So many of the player always say they don't know what it's like to make games. They just heard the game industry, people work really hard, and they don't have much sleep. So we actually recreated our working environment, and we invite the player to come to our office to see what kind of concept art is on our wall, and to be able to check out a one-to-one space. We also created a story from our developers, and that's actually myself sitting on my desk, to share a moment of what our life is like with our player. And here, this is in Chinese, and actually was worried about what if we don't live up to our previous game, wouldn't we disappoint our players? And it seems like when the player discovered these kind of shared messages, they actually feel connected with us. Not only are we trying to let vulnerability to create connection between players across different generations, it also brings players within the same generation together. There are many friendships forming over Japan and Korea, even though politically they have always been having conflicts. These are players talking about how their best friend is now from the other side of the channel. These are two Filipino players. They started playing our games in soft launch, and throughout the game, they find each other, and they actually meet in real life. And now they are trying to get married as we talk. They were probably the first married couple from Sky players. The other thing what we did is, because we shared our office, we also share what we post on our office wall. We put our favorite fan art on our wall, and it happened to be these couple find the photo I showed earlier on our wall. So it was kind of like a very breaking the fourth wall between us and them. Another big thing that we noticed is, once you created a game that is about friendship, it's about connection, and it's about that childhood innocence, people like to play with their family. I've run into multiple families who play with each other. These people are typically a mom playing with the daughter, and usually if their siblings are playing, there will be an even bigger group. I noticed in Japan, some of them would drag their grandma into playing. I've actually met a family in America where the three generations do play Sky together. And when we actually create a game about compassion, sometimes terrible things happen in the community, where one of our players died during the play of Sky because he's already in stage 4 cancer. I don't usually know how other games deal with situation of one of the players suddenly died from the community, but because this is a game where people are here to help each other and to collaborate with each other, when the player has passed, he was deeply missed. Many people said that they felt like they've lost a family member. And as of today, I heard that the sister of the player who have passed away actually took over her brother's account, and she's now playing with the community. And what I want to say is that, you know, we players, we human beings, are capable of many, many colors. And it's up to the designer and the game companies to, you know, curate and to, you know, carefully garden the game system. And we reward player for their positive behaviors, and we try to avoid giving strong feedback for player to do morally bad behaviors. And we could actually slowly influence how a player treat each other, even though maybe the last minute they are still teabagging in the shooting game. And thank you.